Hello, my friend, and welcome back or welcome to Something for Everybody. My name is Aaron Mashbitz, and today is a solo episode of the podcast where I'm going to discuss the psychology of suicidal thinking and potentially why we have suicidal thoughts. With that said, we are discussing, right, very difficult topics like death and suicide. And remember, this is not a substitute for professional help. This is for educational purposes only. So let's jump in. According to the World Health Organization, 727,000 people take their own lives every year. Suicide is the third leading cause of death among 15 to 29-year-olds, and there are many, many more people who make suicide attempts. So, let's talk more about these folks who aren't really included in these statistics, right? Talking about the ones who quietly suffer from suicidal thoughts every day. Thoughts like, not wanting to wake up in the morning, which is very alarming and disturbing. So the question is, why is this happening? And what makes so many people turn to such thoughts? This topic is often considered too dark and taboo to discuss. That's why we must speak about it. We must bring it into the light. But because of the stigma attached to it, it does lead many people to suppress their feelings. This suppression can intensify emotions and worsen any suicidal ideation. So let's dive deeper into this important subject. Question: have you ever felt overwhelmed by setbacks? Like every effort you make just leads to another failure. Or maybe you've been in a situation where it seems like there's no way out, no matter how hard you try or think of a solution, right? Psychologists believe that these two emotions, entrapment and defeat, predict suicidal ideation. You have entrapment and defeat. Defeat refers to a sense of constant failure where life feels like a series of battles you can just never win. When defeat sets in, it often leads to entrapment. So defeat often leads to entrapment, which is the perception that you're stuck in a difficult situation with no escape. Again, that's entrapment. These feelings are incredibly difficult and can weigh heavily on anyone's mind. But for individuals experiencing suicidal ideation, these uncomfortable emotions become almost unbearable. When this happens, they might feel like suicide is the only way out, which is certainly not the case, but these emotions feel so powerful and consuming, it may make the brain or convince you that that's the only way out. However, there are other paths to escape them, even if they aren't immediately visible right in front of you, right? Maybe it's therapy, maybe it's support from loved ones, or simply enough time can provide new perspective and solutions that seemed impossible before, or understanding that you have a choice. You have a choice to make a new path for yourself. You always have a choice. Also, those who struggle with suicidal ideation may also feel disconnected from the world around them, even when surrounded by people. This deep sense of loneliness is more than just like being alone. It's being, unseen, unheard, unsupported. This loneliness doesn't just affect our mood, it can alter our thoughts and perceptions and totally sort of warp reality. That's why loneliness can often lead people to think nobody would care. Nobody would care if they weren't there anymore. That's obviously untrue. The world needs you here, but this is what loneliness can warp the brain to think and convince you that nobody needs you here anymore, right? And so we go to what research has found. Researchers have found that feeling lonely can have a devastating impact, especially on vulnerable populations such as the elderly or adolescents, as we've seen with young people's mental health, and certain marginalized communities, plus individuals with chronic illnesses. That's why Harvard said that to live the good life, you need two things: great health, but more importantly, great relationships. And so this is why having a strong network of friends or family can provide emotional support, practical help, and a sense of belonging, potentially relieving the burden of suicidal thoughts. But I know it's often very hard to find this type of support or this kind of support. But we must try. We absolutely must try, no matter how hard it might be, because it's worth it. It's really worth it. And it's 100% life-saving and life-altering. So maybe you're hearing this and you're unfamiliar with suicidal ideation. So imagine this. Imagine experiencing a kind of pain so deep and intense that it feels impossible. It's not physical pain, but it's a psychological one, often referred to as psychache. This is a neologism coined by suicidologist Edwin Scheidham. Psychache is this unbearable psychological pain, hurt, anguish, or soreness and aching. Scheidham theorized that unresolved psychache results in suicidal behavior. So again, imagine that, this unbearable amount of pain and anguish all within your own mind. Imagine that if you're unfamiliar what sort of suicidal ideation or suicidal thoughts feel like. It's an unbearable, unimaginable pain. You feel like you're sort of in the depths of your own hell. And research has shown that people experiencing suicidal ideation are often highly motivated to avoid this psychological pain. And you can understand why. They're not necessarily seeking death itself, but are driven by an intense wish to end their suffering, and the thought of suicide often serves as a potential escape from their psychache. That's why, they might fantasize about dying, even if they don't actively engage in suicidal behavior. In a way, these fantasies provide them comfort from their hurt, because they just want the pain to end and they don't see another way out. That's how deep this psychological pain is. There's a quote that perfectly describes the reality of these thoughts. It goes, "Suicide does not end the pain. It passes it to someone else. By committing suicide, these feelings get transferred to loved ones and create a never-ending loop of pain, grief, and loss inside a dark brain." My family and I completely understand this since we lost my sister back in 2018. That's just a quote, but I also don't really like saying committed suicide. I preferred died by suicide, but it's really up to you what language you want to use. But in the mental health community, we like to use died by suicide. And so that's sort of the deep pain that people feel, and potentially why they see suicide as a way out, as a relief from their pain. And so studies have shown that suicidal thoughts and behaviors are also linked to specific changes in the brain, right? Neuroimaging studies, which use advanced technology to look inside the brain, revealed noticeable changes in certain brain areas when someone experienced suicidal ideation. You have the ventral prefrontal cortex and the dorsal prefrontal cortex are crucial for regulating our emotions and making decisions. Then you have the insular cortex is another key brain region that helps us process our emotions and how we physically feel. When these areas are not working correctly, it can lead to very intense negative feelings and, more importantly, difficulty making decisions. So essentially, these brain changes mean that people experiencing suicidal thoughts often can't think as clearly or make decisions as they normally would. The intensity of these thoughts and emotions can make it hard for them to see beyond their current state of mind. It's very important to understand those types of things and what's happening in the brain. Understanding this can help us see very clearly why suicide is never a good solution, because the brain changes and intense emotions driving these thoughts are temporary. But every person is different and each person's experience is different as well. And that's important to understand. So no matter how overwhelming all of these emotions and thoughts can get, it's important to know that there's always hope. Psychologists call these protective factors, or things that can protect against suicidal thoughts or behaviors, right? Things like learning effective coping mechanisms. These skills act as a toolkit to help you manage stress and emotional pain. Another, right, is having a sense of purpose, whether it's through work or hobbies or personal goals. Having something to strive for that's bigger and outside of you can give your life meaning and direction, a target, something to head at. So you have effective coping strategies, right? You have this sort of mental health toolkit that you've developed, right? And then you have this sort of sense of meaning and purpose. Those are protective factors that you can use and apply and build in your life. Then on top of that, you also have access to mental health resources, right? It's another critical protective factor, potentially like being able to reach out for professional help, and support can make a significant difference. We talked about having a strong network of friends. That's also going to be a protective factor. And so you have those ideas that can be built as skills, as tools into your life as protective factors. The whole point of this is to continue to bring this issue out of the dark, because the more we talk about it, the more we can help save lives, because we all play a part in preventing suicide. And understanding more about suicidal ideation is an important step in making sure, people don't feel alone, and that they have a choice, and that things can get better. And from the outside looking in, we can understand, sort of imagine how deep that pain is and how dark it might be when we're having these sort of suicidal thoughts. And so always remember, this is very true and very accurate, that the world needs you here. Okay? Really, really remember that. The world needs you here. So please share this with everyone you know, because the more informed people are, better equipped we will be able to help ourselves and the ones we love. So thank you for your time and attention. Much love, and I'll see you next time. Thank you very much for tuning into that episode. And if you enjoyed it, click right here for another full-length episode of the podcast. And please don't forget to subscribe. But most importantly, above all else, please take good care of yourselves and others. And I'll see you next time. Lots of love. Cheers.